She was a stranger in a city that didn't speak her name. He was the most dangerous man in the room, and the moment their eyes met across the rooftop, something ancient and terrifying cracked open inside his chest. He had never wanted anything he couldn't have. She had never trusted anyone who wanted too much. But when his hand closed around her wrist in the dark, and the city of Seoul blazed beneath them like 1,000 fallen stars, neither of them could pretend the collision hadn't already begun. Some encounters don't ask for permission. Some feelings don't wait for the right time. Some men don't stop once they've chosen. Welcome to Afro-Korean romance, where love has no borders. If you believe in love, please like, share, and subscribe for more Afro-Korean romance stories. The rooftop party on the 42nd floor of the Han Tower was the kind of event that didn't appear on any public calendar. No press. No uninvited guests. Just Seoul's most powerful people gathered beneath paper lanterns and a pale morning sky, champagne in crystal flutes, laughter wrapped in silk and ambition. It was barely 9 in the morning, but in this world, power didn't wait for afternoon. Keleci adjusted the strap of her camera bag and reminded herself she was only here to work. She was a travel journalist, Ghanaian-born, Lagos-raised, currently surviving on freelance contracts and the quiet belief that the world was still worth documenting. Her editor had pulled strings to get her access to this private gathering, calling it a cultural feature on Seoul's elite morning social scene. What he hadn't told her was that the host of this party was Park Jin-woo. She had Googled the name on the elevator ride up. What she found made her stomach drop. Park Jin-woo, 34. CEO of Jin-woo Group, one of Korea's largest private conglomerates with holdings in real estate, pharmaceuticals, and technology. Also rumored in whispered online forums she shouldn't have been reading, to have significant ties to organizations that operated outside the law. No charges had ever been filed. No whistleblower had ever survived long enough to go public. His public image was immaculate. A philanthropist, a modernizer, the golden son of old Korean money. In every photograph his expression was the same, cold, still, unreachable. Keleci stepped onto the rooftop and immediately felt the shift in atmosphere. The air was expensive. The music was low and Western, jazz bleeding into something Korean and melancholy. Waiters moved like ghosts. And in the center of it all, surrounded by men in dark suits and women in designer mourning wear, stood Park Jin-woo himself. He was taller than she expected, leaner. He wore a charcoal gray suit with no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone, and he stood with the kind of stillness that didn't come from comfort, it came from control. He was listening to the man beside him speak, but his eyes weren't entirely present. They were scanning, cataloging. The way a predator's eyes move even during rest. Keleci looked away first. She always looked away first. That was survival instinct. She moved to the far end of the rooftop, lifted her camera and began framing shots the city below, the morning haze sitting soft over the Han River, the lantern swaying, a woman laughing with her head thrown back, an older gentleman raising his glass toward the sky. She was framing a shot of the skyline when someone stepped into her frame. Not Korean. Voice came from her left. She lowered her camera. The man was perhaps 50, silver-haired Korean with the kind of smile that had been practiced too many times to mean anything genuine. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne and offering one to her. A journalist, she said, not taking the glass. Even better, he smiled wider. Kim D-soo, I'm an advisor to several members of the National Assembly. He tilted the glass slightly toward her. You really should try this. It's from a private vineyard in Burgundy, flown in this morning. I'm working, Keleci said pleasantly and turned back to her camera. He didn't leave. Your name, he pressed. She hesitated, then gave it because refusing felt more complicated than sharing it. Beautiful name, African, Ghanaian, she said. Never been to Ghana. He stepped closer and the space between them shrank in a way she hadn't invited. I'd love to learn more. Perhaps after the event I know a wonderful restaurant in Itaewon. Very private. Keleci kept her expression neutral. She had met 100 Kim D-soos in 100 cities. Men who wore power like cologne and assumed it made them irresistible. She was about to give her standard polite decline when the temperature on the rooftop changed. She felt it before she saw it. a stillness that spread outward from the center of the crowd like a dropped stone in still water. And then Park Jin-woo was standing 3 feet away, a glass of water, not champagne, in his hand, his eyes fixed on Kim Di-soo with an expression that was almost gentle. Almost. "Di-soo," he said quietly. "I need a word with you about the ancient proposal." Kim Di-soo blinked, straightened. The confidence drained from his posture like air from a punctured balloon. "Of course, Jin-woo, right now." "Right now," Park Jin-woo said, and his tone made it clear there was no other option. Kim Di-soo excused himself quickly, almost stumbling in his haste. And then it was just Keleci and the most dangerous man in Seoul standing 4 feet apart on a rooftop 42 floors above the city. She lifted her camera again, deliberately. "Thank you," she said to the lens, not to him. "But I had it handled." A pause, then, "I know." His voice was lower up close, quieter than she expected from a man of his reputation. She lowered the camera slowly and looked at him directly for the first time, because she refused to be the kind of woman who looked away twice. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they were looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch just slightly. Not enough to show, she hoped, but enough that she felt it in her chest like a second heartbeat starting up where there hadn't been one before. She didn't understand it. She didn't like it. "Park Jin-woo," he said. "I know who you are," she replied. Something moved through his expression. Not amusement exactly, something quieter. "And you're still standing here." "Working," she said again, and turned back to her camera and willed her hands not to shake. She heard him set his glass down on the railing beside her. She heard him breathe. She heard the city 42 floors below them, alive and indifferent. And then she heard him walk away, and she exhaled so quietly she almost didn't notice she'd been holding her breath. Later that morning, she reviewed the photos on her laptop in the corner of a cafe 2 blocks from the Han Tower. She went through hundreds of frames, the skyline, the guests, the lanterns, the morning light. And then she stopped. She hadn't realized she'd done it. She hadn't meant to. But there in the middle of her roll was a photograph of Park Jin-woo. He was standing at the railing looking out over the city. His profile was sharp and still and lonely in a way the public image never showed. She had captured it without thinking, the way a camera sometimes caught what the eye refused to consciously admit it was seeing. She stared at it for a long time. Then she moved it to a private folder and told herself it was just good composition. The next day, her editor called with news she hadn't expected. "Jin-woo Group has invited you for a follow-up interview," Marcus said. "One-on-one, CEO level. Jin-woo himself." Keleci set down her coffee cup very carefully. "Why? Apparently he liked your work. He specifically asked for you. Keleci, this is the interview of your career. He never does press. Never." She stared out the window of her rented apartment in Mapo, watching the street below fill with the morning rush. She thought about dark brown eyes and a voice that was quieter than it had any right to be. "Send me the details," she said. The Jin-woo Group headquarters occupied the top 6 floors of a tower in Gangnam that made every other building in the district look apologetic. Keleci arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a burnt orange wrap dress that her mother had always said made her look like sunset on water. She had worn it deliberately, not for him, she told herself. For herself, because she needed armor that didn't look like armor. She was escorted to the 48th floor by a woman named Secretary O who spoke in clipped, efficient sentences and looked at Keleci with professional neutrality that might have been the most honest welcome she'd received in Seoul so far. The office was enormous and almost aggressively minimal, floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that held only a laptop, a glass of water, and a single photograph in a frame she couldn't see from the doorway. No art on the walls except for one large canvas, abstract, dark blue and gold, turbulent in the way something natural and uncontrolled is turbulent. Park Jin-woo was standing at the window when she entered. He turned. And once again she felt that second heartbeat kick to life in her chest, unwelcome and insistent. "MS. Keleci," he said. "You came." "I'm a journalist," she said. "You offered an exclusive." "Of course I came." Something shifted in his expression again. That same almost movement like wind over still water. "Please sit." Interview lasted 2 hours. He was brilliant. She hadn't expected that, or rather, she had expected a certain kind of powerful man brilliance, the performed kind, rehearsed and careful. What she got instead was something rawer. He spoke about the pharmaceutical division with genuine technical depth. He spoke about a community housing project in Busan with something that sounded dangerously close to passion. He deflected every question about his personal life not with practiced evasion, but with a directness that felt almost honest. That's not something I discuss, she pushed. It was her job to push. Rumors about Jun-woo's connections to organized crime, she said, watching him carefully. What do you say to that? A silence. Then, I say that powerful people always attract powerful rumors. And that I'd be more worried about someone powerful enough to have no enemies at all. That's not a denial, she said. He looked at her steadily. No, he said. It isn't. She wrote it down. Her hand was steady, her pulse was not. After the interview, Secretary Oh appeared to escort her out. Keleci was gathering her things when Park Jin-woo spoke again from behind her. Are you free for dinner? She turned. He was still at his desk, not looking at her, closing the laptop. That's not part of the interview, she said. No, he agreed. It's a different question. She thought about the photograph in her private folder. She thought about Kim Dae-soo stepping too close and the temperature of the rooftop changing. She thought about a voice that was quieter than it had any right to be. Have plans, she said. She didn't have plans, she left. And in the elevator, she pressed her back against the cold metal wall and breathed through something she didn't have a name for yet. A few days later, she discovered he had arranged for her hotel to be upgraded. She was staying at a mid-range business hotel in Hongdae, perfectly adequate, nothing remarkable. She returned from a shoot one evening to find her key no longer worked, and the front desk informed her apologetically that her room had been changed. The new room was on the top floor. It was a suite. It had a standing bathtub, a view of the Han River, a fruit arrangement, and a note that read only, Seoul can be dangerous at night. This is safer. PJW Keleci stood in the middle of the suite holding the note for a full 60 seconds. Then she called the front desk and asked to speak to the manager. She was polite but absolutely clear. She would pay for the suite upgrade herself, or she would return to her original room. The manager, to his credit, kept a professional expression and explained that the suite had been paid in advance and was non-refundable. She ended up keeping the suite because she was a journalist on a freelance budget and she was not completely without pragmatism. But she wrote him a message through the Jun-woo press contact email. I can handle my own safety. Don't do that again. He replied within 4 minutes, which told her he had been watching for her message. Noted. The fruit was also from me. You can throw that out if it bothers you. She looked at the fruit arrangement. Perfect mangoes, star fruit, dragon fruit, laid out with the kind of care that suggested someone had thought about it. She ate a mango standing at the window looking out at the river. She didn't throw it out. The following week, she ran into him at an art exhibition in Insadong that she was covering for a culture piece. She was moving through the gallery with her notebook when she turned a corner and nearly walked directly into his chest. He caught her arm, one hand, warm and steady, closing around her forearm just above the wrist. They stood like that for a moment, one breath too, before he let go. You following me? She asked. This exhibition has been on my calendar for 3 months, he said calmly. You can verify with my secretary. She believed him, which was almost more unsettling. He walked with her through the gallery. She didn't invite it and she didn't stop it, and she told herself this was research, understanding who he was in a context outside his office. That was journalism. That was professional. The artist was a young Korean woman who painted in large, immersive strokes landscapes that felt emotional rather than literal. Park Jin-woo stopped in front of a large piece that was all dark blue and a single column of gold cutting through it, and he was quiet for a long time. What do you see? Keleci asked, because she was watching his face instead of the painting and she hadn't decided yet if she should be ashamed of that. Something trying very hard to get through, he said. She wrote it down. Not for the article. 3 days later, she was having coffee on the terrace of a cafe in Bucheon with Daniel Osai, a Ghanaian economist based in Seoul who was a source for a separate story she was working on. They were old friends, comfortable, warm, laughing about something Daniel had said about Korean bureaucracy. She didn't notice the black car parked across the street, But Daniel noticed that she went very still a few minutes later, and he turned to look over his shoulder and saw nothing unusual. He turned back. "You okay?" "Yes," she said and meant it, and didn't understand why her skin felt electric. Later that night, she received a message from the June press email. "Who is the man you were with this afternoon in Bukshan?" Keleci stared at the message. The heat that moved through her was not entirely anger. She typed back, "That is absolutely none of your business." His reply came in 2 minutes. "He was sitting too close to you." She put the phone face down on the hotel bedside table and lay on her back staring at the ceiling of the suite he had paid for. The Han River glittered through the window. The city hummed 40 floors below. She was in very serious trouble and she knew it. She told herself to file her first article, collect her payment, and book a flight home to Lagos. She had been telling herself this for 2 weeks. She had a notebook full of material, a folder full of photographs, a suite paid for by a man she should not be thinking about the way she was thinking about him, and absolutely no business staying in Seoul 1 day longer than her assignment required. She bought a return ticket on a Tuesday morning. On Tuesday afternoon, her editor called with a second assignment, a 3-week deep dive on Korean corporate culture for a major international publication. The money was more than she made in 4 months. The publication was one she had been trying to break into for years. The subject agreed to full access, Marcus said. Jun-woo Group. The CEO himself requested you specifically, Keleci. He said, and I'm quoting here, the journalist with the orange dress. Keleci closed her eyes. She canceled the flight. Full access turned out to mean exactly what it said. She arrived at Jun-woo headquarters the next morning and was given a pass that opened doors she suspected most of the staff couldn't open. She sat in on executive meetings. She toured the pharmaceutical research wing. She visited the Busan housing project he had mentioned in the interview, a development providing subsidized housing for 300 families, funded entirely through Jun-woo's foundation, no government grant, no press fanfare. Standing in the courtyard of the completed complex, watching children chase each other around a new playground, she asked him, "Why no press on this?" "Because the families didn't ask for a photo opportunity," he said. "They asked for a home." She wrote it down. Her hand wasn't entirely steady. By the end of the second week, the pattern of their days had become something she tried not to examine too closely, because examination would require honesty, and honesty would require admission, and admission would require a courage she wasn't sure she had yet. He was always nearby. Not intrusively, he had a talent for being present without crowding, a quality she had not expected from a man of his power and intensity. He brought her coffee in the mornings before she could request it, black, no sugar, exactly right, which meant someone had been paying attention. He redirected conversations toward her whenever a male colleague spoke over her in a meeting. He appeared at her elbow when a situation felt off, said very little. And the situation immediately resolved itself. She noticed all of it. She said nothing about any of it. And then, on a Thursday evening, she was working late in a borrowed office on the 46th floor when 3 men from the legal team, one of whom had made it quietly clear from the first day that he resented her access, cornered her near the elevator bank. Not physically. But the language was designed to intimidate. Questions about her editor's credentials, suggestions that her visa status might need reviewing, a comment about how certain stories could be misinterpreted by outside journalists who don't understand Korean culture. She held her ground. She had been holding her ground in boardrooms and press junkets and hostile corners of foreign countries her entire career. Her expression didn't change. Her voice didn't shake, but she felt the walls closing. And then the elevator opened and Park Jin-woo walked out and the walls stopped closing. He looked at the 3 men once, just once. "Go home," he said. They went. He looked at her then, and his expression was something she had not seen on his face before, something open and almost pained, like a door cracked just slightly wider than intended. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said, Keleci. Something about the way he said her name, not a question, not a command, just her name, with the weight of someone who had said it many times in private and was only now saying it aloud to her, made everything she had been holding back for 2 weeks push against the inside of her chest. "I'm fine," she said, and looked away because she was not fine and he clearly knew it. "I just want to finish my notes and go back to the hotel." He walked her to the elevator. He rode it down to the lobby. He waited with her until her car arrived, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool lobby air, and said nothing. When the car pulled up, he opened the door for her, and as she slid in, he bent slightly and said quietly, close enough that only she could hear, "No one will speak to you that way again." Car pulled away. Keleci sat in the back seat in the dark and pressed her fingers to her sternum where that second heartbeat lived now, persistent and terrifying, and did not allow herself to cry. That evening, she called her best friend Amara back in Lagos. "I think I'm in trouble," she said. Amara, who had known Keleci for 15 years and understood her with the precision of someone who had watched her survive everything from a flooded apartment to a broken engagement, said, "What kind of trouble?" "The kind you can't file a story about." A pause, then, "Oh, that kind of trouble. He's dangerous, Amara." "Dangerous how?" Keleci looked out the window at the Seoul night, the city blazing past like something on fire. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "That's the problem." The next morning she arrived at Jin-woo headquarters to find her borrowed office had been moved to the 48th floor, 3 doors down from his. The new office had better light, a standing desk, fresh coffee already made, and a small plant she had not asked for that she immediately identified as a peace lily, which she had mentioned offhandedly 2 days ago was her favorite because her grandmother grew them. Someone had been listening very carefully. She sat down at the desk. She opened her notebook. She looked at the peace lily for a long time. Then she got to work, because she was Keleci, and she was always going to get to work, and whatever was happening to her was not going to change that. On a Friday evening, Jin-woo hosted a private dinner for investors and partners at a hotel in Gangnam. Keleci attended as press, or as close to press as full access allowed, which meant she was seated at the periphery of the main table with Secretary Oh and 2 other staff members. She was professionally invisible, which was how she preferred it at these events. She could watch more clearly from the edges. She was watching when Young-min-ho, a junior partner from a joint venture firm, sat down beside her uninvited and started talking in the easy, practiced way of a man who considered himself universally welcome. He was handsome. She noticed that factually and without much investment. He offered to get her wine, suggested they discuss a collaboration between her publication and his firm's communications department, touched her hand briefly when she made a point he agreed with. From across the room, she felt the shift. She had learned to recognize it now. The change in air pressure. The way conversation near Park Jin-woo subtly altered its rhythm. She looked up across 40 feet of candlelight and crystal and met his eyes, and what she saw there was not the controlled stillness she had grown accustomed to. His jaw was tight. His hand, wrapped around a glass, was still but rigid. His eyes moved from the junior partner's hand, which was no longer on hers because Keleci had moved hers the moment the contact happened, back to her face. She held his gaze deliberately. "I handled it," she said with her eyes. "I always handle it." He looked away. He said something to the man beside him and the conversation resumed and the professional mask was back, seamless and cold and perfect. But she had seen what was underneath it, and it was the most frightening thing she had discovered in Seoul. The dinner ended late. Keleci was in the lobby pulling on her coat when she heard her name and turned to find Park Jin-woo walking toward her, jacket unbuttoned, the event behind him still glittering and full of voices. "I'll have a car take you back," he said. "I can arrange my own car." "I know you can," he said, and then quietly, with the kind of honesty that landed somewhere between confession and warning, "Let me do this." She looked at him for a long moment. The lobby was full of people, staff, guests, the beautiful controlled chaos of a gathering winding down. But in that moment it felt very quiet. "Why?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Because I can't watch you leave and not know you arrived safely." The words sat between them like something that had been set down very gently because it was fragile. She didn't argue. She didn't thank him. She walked with him to the private exit, and the car was already waiting. And he opened the door and she got in, and he stood on the pavement and watched the car pull away with the expression of a man who had made a decision he wasn't ready to reverse. The next morning, everything changed. Keleci was at a cafe in Mapo writing when her phone rang with an unknown Seoul number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. The voice on the other end was male, Korean, speaking in English with careful precision. Ms. Keleci, we understand you are conducting a close investigation of Park Jin-woo and the Jun-won group. We'd like to share some information with you that we believe would be of significant journalistic interest. Her journalist's instinct fired immediately. Who is this? A party with considerable interest in seeing an accurate picture of Mr. Park's activities presented to the public. That's not an answer. Prefer to meet in person. A public location of your choosing. Today, if possible. She sat very still. Every alarm she had, professional, personal, instinctive, was ringing. This was the kind of call that could be a story or could be a trap, and in her experience with powerful men and the enemies they made, the two were rarely mutually exclusive. "Call you back," she said. She hung up and immediately called Marcus in Lagos. She told him about the call, gave him the number, and asked him to run it through their publication's security contacts while she sat and thought. Then, after a long pause, she did something she still wasn't sure was professional or personal or some blurred, inconvenient combination of both. She texted Park Jin-woo. "Someone just called me claiming to have information about you. Unknown number. They want to meet." His reply came in 40 seconds. "Where are you right now?" she told him. "Don't go anywhere." "I'm coming." She put the phone down and looked at her coffee and thought about all the ways a woman in a foreign city could be foolish, and concluded that she was being several of them simultaneously. He arrived in 18 minutes. She had counted. He sat down across from her without greeting, took her phone, looked at the unknown number, and his expression did the thing that controlled, almost imperceptible shift that she now recognized as the face he made when something genuinely alarmed him. "This number belongs to a man named Lim Chial-soo," he said quietly. "He works for Daesung Holdings. They are Jun-won's primary competitor and have spent 4 years attempting to fabricate regulatory violations against us." He set the phone down and looked at her directly. "Whatever they want to tell you is not information, it's a script. I'm a journalist," she said. "I can evaluate sources." "I know." He said, "I'm not questioning your competence. I'm telling you that these men are dangerous in ways that aren't editorial." He paused. 3 years ago, a financial reporter accepted a similar meeting. He was found 2 days later in the Han River. The cafe hummed around them. Somewhere, someone laughed. Keleci kept her voice level. "Are you telling me my safety is at risk?" "I'm telling you that I will not allow it to be," he said. And the way he said it, not as a performance, not as a power display, but with the flat certainty of a man stating a fact he intends to make true regardless of what the universe requires of him, cracked something open inside her that she had been keeping very carefully sealed. "Jin-woo," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. She felt him register it, a slight tension in his shoulders, a fractional shift in his expression. "You can't decide that," he agreed. "But I can do everything in my power to make it reality. There's a difference." She looked at him across the small cafe table, the morning light falling across his face, the city outside the window going on without them, and she thought, "I am in so much trouble." Marcus confirmed by afternoon that the number was connected to a shell company registered to a Daesung subsidiary. The meeting was a plant, not necessarily violent, but certainly designed to feed her fabricated information that would compromise the article, and more likely, compromise her professional reputation if she ran it. She didn't go to the meeting. She did, however, lie awake that night for 2 hours thinking about a man who had driven across the city in 18 minutes because she had sent a single text. 3 days later, the Daesung situation escalated. She didn't find out until it was already over, which was how he preferred it. She understood that afterward. She was at the Jun-won research facility in eastern Seoul when Secretary Oh appeared at her elbow and quietly informed her that she was being moved to a secure room for a short time while a building security matter was resolved. "What kind of matter?" Keleci asked. Secretary Oh's professional neutrality held admirably. "A precautionary measure, Ms. Keleci." The secure room turned out to be a conference room with reinforced glass and a security feed. She watched the lobby of the facility on the monitor and saw 3 men being escorted out by Jin-woo security staff. Efficiently, quietly, with the kind of force that didn't need to make noise to be absolute. She was in the room for 40 minutes. When Secretary Oh returned and escorted her out, Park Jin-woo was in the main corridor, sleeves rolled to the elbows, in conversation with 2 men she recognized as senior security. He looked up when she appeared, and the relief that moved through his expression was so brief, so private, that she almost missed it. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Been in a conference room," she said. "Nothing happened to me." "What happened out here?" He glanced at Secretary Oh, who found something urgent to attend to at a nearby desk. "Daesung sent people," he said, "to question staff about your access and your article. They intended to obtain your research materials." She stared at him. "They were going to steal my work. They were going to use it," he said carefully, "before you could publish it." Implications settled over her slowly. Her research on Jin-woo, if published selectively, stripped of context, weaponized by a competitor, could be shaped into something that looked like corporate scandal. Her work, her name on it, the anger that moved through her was clean and total. "Want everything you know about Daesung Holdings," she said. Something in his expression shifted into something she had not seen before, pure, uncomplicated admiration. "Have it prepared tonight," he said. They worked late together in his office for the first time that evening. She at the standing desk with her laptop, he at his own desk. A spread of documents between them that included financial records, regulatory filings, and information she suspected had not been obtained through entirely conventional means and chose not to ask about directly. Around 11, Secretary Oh had gone home. The building was quiet. Seoul glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a galaxy laid flat. He brought her tea without asking. She noticed he had remembered no milk, half a spoon of honey, and didn't remark on it, because remarking on it would mean admitting that she had noticed how much he noticed. "Why does Daesung want you destroyed so badly?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I refused to sell them the pharmaceutical division 4 years ago. They offered a significant sum. I declined because the acquisition would have cost 300 workers their jobs." He turned a page. "They haven't forgiven me for choosing people over profit." She looked up from her laptop. He was reading, not looking at her, and so she allowed herself the quiet luxury of looking at him. The sharp line of his jaw, the way his hands moved through documents with the same careful precision he brought to everything, the slight furrow of concentration between his brows. The photograph she had taken on the rooftop. The man in it looking out over the city with an expression of loneliness so total it looked like the landscape itself. "Jin-woo," she said. He looked up. "Things they say about you," she said carefully. "The organized crime connections, the rumors." She paused. "How much of it is true?" A long silence. He set down the document he was holding. "My father built this company using methods I would not use now," he said. "Some of the people who helped him build it are still connected to us through obligations I inherited alongside the corporation." He held her gaze steadily. "I have been spending 4 years severing those connections, quietly, in ways that don't create bodies or headlines." A pause. "It's slower than people would like. It's less dramatic, but it's the only way that doesn't destroy everything my father built along with what he did wrong." She wrote nothing down. This was off the record and they both knew it. "And if I print something that gets in the way of that," she asked, "then I'll deal with the consequences," he said simply. "I won't ask you to protect me at the cost of your journalism, Keleci. That's not something I would ask." She looked at him for a long moment. "What would you ask?" she said. And she hadn't meant it to sound the way it sounded, a question that went somewhere deeper than the article, somewhere neither of them had said out loud yet. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was full, heavy with everything that had been accumulating since a rooftop and a camera and a morning full of lanterns and a man who had driven across Seoul in 18 minutes because she had sent a single text. "I would ask," he said quietly, "that you trust me, that's all, not to protect me, just to trust that I'm trying to be someone worth trusting." City hummed outside. Somewhere far below, Seoul was alive and bright and indifferent to the 2 people on the 48th floor holding a conversation in the dark that had nothing and everything to do with journalism. Keleci shut her laptop. She stood, and she walked to the window, and she looked out at the river, and she heard him stand and come to stand beside her, and the distance between them was 3 inches of charged air that felt like the most honest space she had ever occupied. "I'm scared," she said, to the window. To the river, to the city below. "Of what? Of how this feels," she said. "I'm good at leaving, Jin-woo. I've been leaving places my whole career. I know how to not get attached. I'm very good at it." She paused. "And I don't know what to do with the fact that it isn't working anymore." He was quiet for a moment that felt like the held breath before something irreversible. "Stay," he said, simply. Not a command, not a plea. Just a word laid out like something true that had finally found its way to the surface. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with all of it visible. Everything he had been managing and controlling, and carefully not saying since a rooftop 42 floors above the city on a morning full of lanterns. It was the most unguarded she had ever seen another human being look, and it was the most frightening and the most beautiful thing, and she had a profession that existed on the principle of honest witness. She reached up and put her hand against his face, just her palm, warm against his jaw. He closed his eyes for a single second, like someone receiving something they had stopped believing was possible. And then she kissed him, and the city kept going, and the river kept moving. And the rest of it, the danger, the article, the desung men, the rumors, all of it, receded into the quiet hum of something that had made its choice and wasn't going back. It was the first thing that had felt, in a very long time, entirely true, afterward. And the afterward was quiet and warm and full of the kind of closeness that doesn't need narrating because its truth lives in the details of small things. A jacket around her shoulders, a hand that doesn't let go, the way 2 people breathe differently in the presence of something real. She fell asleep on the couch in his office, her notebook still open beside her, the city blazing through the windows. She woke at 4 in the morning to find a blanket over her, her shoes removed and placed neatly beside the couch, and him asleep in his desk chair with his head tilted back and his hands loose in his lap, looking in sleep like something the world hadn't managed to harden all the way through. She looked at him for a long time. Then the fear came, the way it always came after something good, quiet at first, then louder, a familiar voice that sounded like every person who had ever left or been let down. He'll change when he has what he wants. Men like this don't stay soft. You're a story, not a destination. You don't belong here. You never belong. She got up very quietly. She gathered her things. She wrote nothing. She left. She was in a taxi to the hotel when her phone started ringing. She didn't answer. She was in the hotel lobby when it started again. She didn't answer. She was in the elevator when she heard it, not a call but a voice. "Keleci," she turned. He was in the lobby. He had followed her from the office building to the hotel across Seoul at 4 in the morning, still in his dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his jacket gone. She was wearing it, she realized. She was still wearing his jacket. "How did you?" "I woke up," he said. He walked toward her. "And you were gone." Something moved through his face. "You do that," he said. "You run." "I protect myself," she said. "That's not the same thing from me?" he asked. And his voice was so quiet and so direct and so entirely without armor that she felt the tears come before she could stop them, and she hated herself for it, except that she also didn't. "Going to wake up one day," she said, "and realize you only wanted what you couldn't have. And I can't," her voice caught. "I can't be in a city I don't know, in a story that could end me professionally, attached to a man who decides he doesn't need me once I've stopped being new." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, familiar already in the way that made her chest ache. "Look at me," he said. She did. "I have wanted nothing in my adult life that I have not calculated," he said. "I do not make decisions from impulse. I do not say things I don't mean. I have known from the moment you told me you had it handled on a rooftop at 9 in the morning while Kim Di-soo made you uncomfortable that you were someone I could not lose." His jaw was tight. His eyes were entirely open. "I don't know how to be simple about this. I'm not a simple man, but I am telling you with everything I have that you are not a story to me. You are not temporary. You are the thing I drove across the city at 4 in the morning in my dress shirt for, and I would do it 1,000 more times." Elevator opened behind her. Neither of them moved. "Live in Lagos," she said, because it was the last true objection she had, and she had to put it on the table. I know, he said. We'll figure it out. You don't know anything about long distance, he agreed. But I know about wanting something enough to do hard things. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. She breathed. She was still wearing his jacket. Jin-woo, she said. Yes, I'm terrified of you. I know, he said softly. I'm terrified of you too. You walked onto that rooftop and took a photograph of me when you thought I wasn't looking, and I haven't been the same since. She looked at him. You saw that? I saw everything, he said. I always saw everything. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers immediately, completely, with the certainty of a man who does not hold things loosely. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing real ever is. The article was published, fair, thorough, honest, the best work she had done in years. It named Jung-won's historical connections with precision and also documented, with equal precision, the 4-year campaign to dismantle those connections. It named Daesung's attempts to sabotage the reporting. It made waves. It won her the international platform she had been working toward her entire career. Marcus called her crying, which he would never admit to anyone. Daesung responded with a legal threat that Park Jin-woo's team dismantled in 72 hours. Lim Cheol-soo, the man who had called her in the cafe, was arrested in connection with the attempted theft of her research materials. The junior partner from the dinner, Young Min-ho, turned out to be a Daesung plant. He was quietly dismissed. Through all of it, Park Jin-woo stood at a careful professional distance publicly because they had agreed on it, her integrity required it, and he respected her integrity above everything. Privately, he showed up. Coffee, the right distance, the right words, a hand on her back in a corridor when she came out of a difficult call with lawyers. Small acts of love that don't announce themselves. She extended her visa. She went back to Lagos for 3 weeks. He flew to Lagos on a Saturday for 36 hours, which she found out only when he appeared at the door of her apartment holding a mango, looking slightly uncertain in a way she had never seen on him in Seoul and found completely disarming. She introduced him to Amara, who took one look at him and texted Keleci from across the room. Oh, you are absolutely done for. He met her mother, who asked him 6 pointed questions in rapid Twi that Keleci only partially translated, and he answered each one through her with patient, direct honesty that made her mother look at her daughter afterward with an expression that said, "Don't be foolish." She moved to Seoul 6 months later. Not for him, for a full-time correspondent position at a Seoul-based international publication that had been recruiting her since the June 1 article ran. He found her an apartment in Mapo, which she chose herself from a list his real estate team prepared, and which he paid the deposit on, which she paid him back for over the following 4 months, which he accepted without argument because he understood that this mattered to her. He learned to leave the fruit out for her because she liked to find it herself. She learned that he kept exactly 1 photograph on his desk, the photograph she had taken on the rooftop at the morning party, the profile shot, the one she had put in a private folder and never thought he'd see. She had sent it to him 3 months into whatever they were, because it felt like the honest thing to do. He had it framed. On a Saturday morning, 11 months after a rooftop and a camera and a man who drove across Seoul in 18 minutes, he asked her to marry him in the kitchen of her Mapo apartment in his home clothes, with no ring box because the ring was already in his hand. A quiet, unusual piece, rose gold and dark stone, nothing conventional, nothing performed. "I want you to be my family," he said, simply. The way he said everything that mattered, she looked at the ring. She looked at him. She thought about Lagos and Seoul and airports and articles and a mango eaten standing at a window above the Han River. She thought about being terrified. She thought about it being worth it. Yes, she said. They were married the following spring twice. Once in Seoul, at a small ceremony attended by his family and closest staff in Amara, who flew in from Lagos and cried openly and unapologetically. Once in Accra, at a celebration that lasted 2 days, and included her grandmother's peace lilies woven through every arrangement, and her mother dancing in a way that suggested she had known this was coming long before Keleci did. In the photographs from both ceremonies, Park Jin-woo looked like a man who had gotten through something and come out the other side into something he hadn't dared to believe was real. In all of them, he was looking at her. The following winter, she was finishing a story at her desk in their apartment now, the Mappo one she had kept because it had better light and he had simply arrived in it gradually, the way water finds its level. When she looked up and found him standing in the doorway watching her with an expression she knew by now like she knew her own handwriting. "What?" she said. He crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair and put his hands on her knees and looked up at her with something in his eyes that was beyond anything she had words for. "Are you happy?" he asked. He asked her this sometimes, not rhetorically. He actually wanted to know. She looked at the apartment, the peace lily on the windowsill, the photograph on his desk visible from here, the city outside the window, the man kneeling in front of her with everything he was written plainly on his face. She put her hand against his jaw the way she had done on a night above the city when everything changed. "Yes," she said, honestly, completely. "Are you?" He turned his face slightly into her hand, closed his eyes for 1 second. "Yes," he said. 4 months later, she told him about the baby on a Tuesday morning in the kitchen, holding a mug of tea she hadn't drunk because the smell of it had been making her nauseous for 2 weeks. She just held it out to him, the test, not the mug, and watched his face. What happened to Park Jin-woo's face in that moment was something she would spend the rest of her life unable to adequately describe and unwilling to try, because some things belong only to the people inside them. He sat down on the kitchen floor, right there on the tile, and put his face in his hands, and she got down on the floor beside him and put her arms around him and felt his shoulders shake just once with something that was not grief, something its opposite, and held on. The city of Seoul went on outside their window, bright and alive and indifferent, the way cities are. The Han River moved. The lanterns somewhere swayed. And inside that kitchen on that floor, something that had started on a rooftop with a camera and a moment of impossible recognition had arrived, finally and completely at the place it had always been moving toward. Some encounters don't ask for permission. Some feelings don't wait. And some men, once they have chosen, do not stop. He wanted what he couldn't have. She said no until she said yes. And what happened next? Love. Real, terrifying, total love. The kind that burns down every reason not to.